and girls, today we're going to talk about a little girl called Amy, and she left Belfast, Northern Ireland to go to India for over 50 years, and as a little girl she had brown eyes and she used to pray, God, please give me blue eyes, but God never answered that prayer, and we're going to find out why. Let's sing as we think of India and Northern Ireland. Let's sing this song, God of Creation.
I'm part of God's creation, part of His plan for everything. I'm part of God's creation, He has a plan for me. God made the world of beauty, a world of order too. God made man in His image and gave him work to do. I'm part of God's creation, part of His plan for everything. I'm part of God's creation. He has a plan for me. He has a plan for me. He has a plan for me.
Wonderful, God has a plan for me. And now we're going to find out God's plan was for little Amy. We're going to go to Bangor in County Down and to see what happened from Bangor all the way to India. Here we go. Boys and girls, today we're in Bangor, County Down. We're going to talk about a little girl called Amy Carmichael. She was born in Malile, not far from Bangor. And her story is a story of a little girl who emigrated, went to India to serve God. And here's how the story goes. Amy grew up in a family of 7. There were 7 children. One of her dreams, or not so much a dream, a prayer to God was, Amy had brown eyes and her friends and her siblings had blue eyes, and she would pray at night time. She said, God, please give me blue eyes. I want to be like everybody else, and please give me blue eyes. And of course, when she woke up in the morning and ran to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, her eyes were brown colour, and she was really disappointed because she wanted blue eyes. And sometimes whenever we say a prayer, we want God to answer it our way, and that's not always the way. And certainly whenever Amy prayed for brown eyes, or blue eyes, it never happened because she had brown eyes. Amy, she had a real heart for other people and a heart for children. And whenever you read Amy's life story, whenever she went to church, she learned all about God, and she became a Christian when she was a young age. And right away, she knew the importance of serving God and also loving other people and serving other people. And at that time, there was quite a lot of people who worked in the mill. Her father was a mill worker, and father actually died when Amy was quite young, and she was the eldest of her siblings, her brothers and sisters, and she had to help her mother as she would raise her other brothers and sisters. But she noticed a lot of people at that time were very, very poor. In Belfast, they were called shawlies. Shawlies were the children or young people who would wear shawls around them. They didn't have nice clothes to wear. They didn't dressed like nice, respectable people. So she called them the mill. She was known as the mill girl who worked with the shawlies. And she wanted to reach these people. So whenever she was a teenager, she would organise meetings for the mill girls. These were girls who worked in the mill. People left school at quite a young age then, and she would reach teenagers called the mill girls. But whenever she would bring them to church, the church people were very respectable people, dressing very nicely on a Sunday, and they would look down at such people and didn't really want them into their church. So Amy, together with some friends, they raised money and they prayed and they said, Lord, please give us a building where we can have meetings just for mill girls. So we can really reach the girls who work in the mill for Jesus Christ and teach them about God. And God answered prayer in a wonderful, really fast way, and quickly she got enough money to buy her building. It was a tin hut that would seat 500 people. It was like a Sunday school to reach 500 children, a huge amount of people today and even at that time. But then as she was growing up and serving God and working hard, her family then, her mum and some of her brothers and sisters, they moved to England. And there while in England, she immediately wanted to do the same type of work by reaching people who worked in the mill to reach them for God, and young people, especially children, to teach them the Bible. But then she began to get unsettled, and Amy Carmichael began to pray, said, Lord, I feel you're calling me. I want to go and serve you all of my life to do something for you. But Amy never had
never had good health. And whenever she went to certain missionary organisations, she was not accepted to go because her health was not strong enough. But she persevered, and she went with another organisation, and she went to Japan. And while she was living in Japan for 2 years, she worked hard to reach people to learn the language, but her health was not strong enough to stay there, and she came back home again to England. And whenever she came back home again, she felt, Lord, I want to go somewhere to serve you. I want to go somewhere to live for you. And God then sent her to India. And little did Amy Carmichael know, whenever she went to India, she would never return home again. In fact, she lived there for 55 years serving God. 55 years. And what type of work did she do? Whenever you think of a missionary today, you think of somebody who goes to teach people about God, builds a church, people come in and you preach. That is a good way, but it's not always the way. But Amy's life story, Amy became a writer. I think she published something like 37 books. But at the end of her life, she had an accident and she was bedridden for 20 years. She couldn't leave her room, couldn't hardly leave her bed, and there she would write, I think it was 13 books from her bed. But her main life journey, her main life's work was reaching children. Not normal children from a family with a mum and a dad, but abandoned children, orphan children, children who, unless she rescued them, these are children who might be abused and taken away and used for slavery work, or type of work that's not very nice for human. It's called human trafficking today. And Amy had a real heart for these children. Lots of people there never cared about abandoned children, and Amy would do the same as what she'd done in Belfast. Whenever she would build a building and bring the children in. And Amy then, not only did she start little orphanages, or she started a hospital and also a school, because the little children would come as little orphan children, and she would get people in to help her, and then she would build a school. And lots of the children were sick, so she needed to care for them. So she ended up praying, and she said, God, I not only need a school, I need a hospital, and I need staff, I need doctors and nurses. And God gave her all those things. That's why her life story is so important, because she made a big impact for God, an impact for children, an impact in India. One of the little girls we read about in the story of Amy Carmichael is a little girl called Priya. And many of these little children were abandoned and left in the temple. In the temple, quite often you read horrible stories of how some of the children might be abused or neglected. And one of those little girls called Priya is one of the little girls who escaped from the temple, and she heard about Mama, she heard about Amy Carmichael, and she made her way, I think as a 7-year-old little girl, to Amy Carmichael. And Amy Carmichael realised that she was going to be a mama, not just to this one little girl, because how could she possibly let her go back to where she came from? But Amy Carmichael became mama to hundreds and maybe thousands of these little children all over the years, 55 years of living in India. Years ago, Joanna and I went to India with a team, and there we were able to spend some time with orphan children connected with the church and the missionary organisation that was there. It gave us an insight of what the little Indian children, orphan children, thousands of them, hundreds of thousands all over India, without a mum, without a dad, and the type of background many of them would come from. The fellowship that Amy Carmichael worked with or established is known as the Dohnavur Fellowship. And even today, all these years later, it's still very active, still very strong, rescuing many, many children from poverty, from slavery, from abuse, from neglect, and still goes on to this day. Amy Carmichael said many wonderful things. She said, you can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving. She said this here about gossip. Let nothing be said about anyone unless it passes through the 3 sieves. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And we could all learn from that. Whenever someone says something to you, before you would repeat, ask yourself the 3 questions. Is what that person said to me, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And quite often, 99% of the time, the conversation will stop there and needs to go no further. And she never got back home again. She never got a nice place to be buried, a nice funeral service. She just buried beside a tree. You see a little bird box where the birds would come in and wash themselves. And it just says the date of her birth and the date of her or death, and that's Amy Carmichael. So she spent 55 years living in India, making a big impact for God amongst little abandoned children. And she had a nickname called Mama. She was never married, never had children of her own, but those little children who came to her, they would look up to her as their mother, their adopted mum. That's why they called her Mama in India. So even in India today, her work still goes on. There's lots of little nursery schools. A school and the hospital still goes on today, founded by Amy Carmichael, who was born in Northern Ireland, gave her life to the Lord Jesus as a little girl. And she realised later on in life that God never gave her blue eyes for a purpose. She was born with brown eyes because the children of India have got brown eyes, and she began to dress like the Indian people. She looked like an Indian person, and it was much easier for her to adapt to the Indian culture. It wasn't all easy by any means. She had lots of problems, lots of difficulties. Her health, she was never in good health. She was away from her family, away from her home, and even some of the people in India did not appreciate what she was doing, because when she tries to rescue children, not everyone at that time thought it was a good thing. So she had many challenges, but the secret for Amy Carmichael's life was she was a Christian, and God was with her, and God was helping her, and God was blessing her. And that's why, boys and girls, life today can be very selfish. We can just think about me and my life and my journey. But Amy Carmichael was one of those people. She put God first, and she put the children second, and she put herself last. And that's what God likes. He always wants us to put him first, other people second, and ourselves last. That's difficult to do, but that's the way God wants the Christian to be. And it's a lovely picture of loving God, loving your neighbour, and loving yourself last. That's a real challenge. So think about Amy Carmichael today, the little girl who grew up having nothing in this world. She wanted blue eyes, but God said, no, Amy, you're born with brown eyes, and accept the way you are, because I'm going to use you. That's a big thing, to accept the way they are. Many children, young people, don't like the way they look. They don't accept the way they are or who they are. And God says, please accept who you are, because you are the very person I want you to be. And that's a real challenge. So thank you for Amy Carmichael and her wonderful legacy and her life story. She was a writer, she was a Christian, and she was a woman who left Northern Ireland to go to India, and she spent the rest of her life reaching children for Jesus Christ. And even today, there are many grandparents, mothers, who will relate right back to the days of Amy Carmichael, when they were just little babies, little girls, and this mama took them in to love them, to care for them, to nourish them, to feed them, and they learnt about God, became a Christian, and now they're shining for God in India today because of this little girl who responded to the call of God and left all and went to India to spend the rest of her life serving God, reaching the Indian children.
Wonderful story all about Amy Carmichael, the missionary to India. So that was all the way from Bangor to India. That's all for today. Time's run off on us. Have a lovely day at school, and don't forget we're back out and about tomorrow. See you.